And hello good people of the internet, it is I, Tommy Kelly, this is Adventures in Woo Woo, and welcome to the office. I did intend, and I did go out to film in a nice location, tried to go for somewhere new rather than just the forest, as much as I love the forest. But I kind of ended up on the beach, and then it was very busy, and then it got windy, and it was just kind of working against me, and I ran out of time. So we ended up having to do it back in the office. But to make up for it, in a slight way, I have changed the angle that I normally do these at to make it a bit more interesting. I don't know how much more interesting a change of angle will be. Anyway, this video is the monthly question and answers video, vlog, podcast, whatever way you listen or watch this stuff, where I ask people to send me some questions and I answer them to the best of my ability, given my current understanding, with the kind of caveat that I may change my mind in the future about any of these topics, given that I receive more information, or I just, change my mind, because that's my prerogative. So, these are from Patreon and Discord, so if you want to get in on this, join the Patreon, they get the preference on the questions, or join the Discord, where you can ask questions if we have enough time. Jose, what's the best comic book ever? The best comic book ever, I would have said, for the majority of time, is Cerebus by Dave Sim and Gerhard. Canadian comic, independent comic about an aardvark who becomes Prime Minister and Pope, and then I suppose an avatar in some way. Really, really good. The first, I would say, from issue 26 to 200 are some of the finest pieces of comic, independent comic art, or comic in general, ever. And I can, the first 25 are a bit too kind of parody for me, and the last 100 issues I can take or leave. Only read them once. I've found it quite not stimulating. Guys is alright, and then everything else to get on that, I'm not so sure. Now I would say that the best comic of all time is Goodnight Pun Pun by Inyo Asano, which I only read in the last, I suppose, year and a half or so. It's a manga, Japanese comic, and it's about basically a young guy's life and going to school and how he adapts to having a shitty home life, shitty school experience, about love, and it's very, very dark, very, very down, very, very depressing, but touches on things that I feel need to be talked about or weren't being talked about, or expresses feelings that people have and I've had, and I'm not quite as I suppose dark as Pun Pun, but he has a great kind of theme in it, or a way where the character itself, Pun Pun, is drawn differently depending on his mood. And he doesn't talk in it, he just, other people talk to him, but he has a kind of an inner monologue. I think he's an inner monologue, he must have, I can't remember. From like a kind of very cartoony bird to a really kind of destructive, demon-y almost type presence. Very, very good, very, very worthwhile. Artwork is amazing. Check out Goodnight Pun Pun if you haven't. It's definitely my favourite comic of all time. Christoph P. Have you anything planned for this Halloween? Group rituals of 47s related? I do. We will be doing the, for Patreons, we'll be doing that yearly thing that we do where we put all our kind of aspirations for the year, or goals for the year, or wish for a year in the box that houses the original 47s, the pictures that I used to activate them 5 years ago at Halloween. And so every year we put in our petitions or wishes or whatever, what's the best word for that. I don't like the word petition because it kind of implies that you're asking for permission, or you're asking for someone external to you to grant your wish, and there's a pleading kind of element to it, but like a goal for the year or something like that. So that's one of the things. And if you're not on Patreon, you can still do that in your own way, and all that information will be up on the website in the next week or so. Every year we do a kind of a ritual around the 47s, around our birthday. I do my own personal stuff as well. And but we'll talk more about that on the blog and on Discord and Facebooks and stuff. Jason Mendel, what's an occult or paranormal conspiracy theory, you enjoyed that you think is absolutely true? Jason, I have tried to answer this 3 or 4 times now, because this was the question I started off with on my couple of failed attempts doing this earlier. And I just end up going into a long spiel about how which I've talked about before, how conspiracy has become less fun for me over the last while as they become more and more mainstream, and we can see their impact on your actual life, rather than it being kind of a fringe entertainment, mind game, paradigm shifting type exercise. So it's kind of my love, or my graw, as we say here in Ireland, for conspiracy theories has kind of lessened, and I'm kind of in a place where I just kind of discount them all. I certainly don't think there's a secret evil cabal that's in charge of the world. It's very powerful people doing very powerful things. Don't think they're in collusion with any kind of, I don't think they're arcanistic in the sense of I don't think they're in collusion with some sort of spirit thing. Perhaps they are. I mean, if I'm using magic, why aren't the people in power using magic? But I tend to go with Alan Moore's rudderless, and people just couldn't. People couldn't do a conspiracy because people would talk, people would get, have arguments. People just don't get on well enough and are too self-centered for a grand conspiracy because someone would want to either get fame, ego out of it, or would want to change the conspiracy to, or whatever they're doing to change them. Anyway, again, I'm rambling again. So I suppose, pretty sure that aliens exist, but I'm not sure they're aliens. With Patrick Harper's the whole idea of these things present themselves, whatever they are, from say fairies to aliens to possibly BVMs, or whatever, over the course of human existence. And it seems to be whatever we're into at the time, they become a reflection of it. So whether that's them hiding, or whether that's them showing themselves, whether they're inventing these new things, so like whether the alien comes first, they present themselves as aliens and then that becomes into the kind of zeitgeist, or whether the alien thing is in the zeitgeist and then they take on that form. I've no idea, but I definitely feel there's something to that. For people who are interested in that kind of train of thought, Patrick Harper's Demonic Reality is a great book to read, as long as there's other stuff. He's really good, really fun, and puts a lot of really things clearly put together. Also, I believe in magic, actual magic, which I suppose is, in this day and age, quite a conspiracy theory. I drink tea. What things do you feel you've outgrown or seen through on your journey, and how have you evolved as a result? Doesn't have to be specifically magic related. Could be just disassociating with someone or an activity, changing jobs, etc. Any amount of them, as we all have had. In a kind of a spiritual sense, is seeing that I had been giving my authority outside of myself to other people, particularly to people who seem to have some sort of authority, like a spiritual leader or someone who had a lot of followers, or someone who'd, authors, or certain people who had, whatever, popular blogs, whatever, and that just because they said something or they believed something, I kind of felt I had to, because I had my truth wasn't real enough for me to express it and for it to be accepted in the world. So I could say something like, magic is real, but if someone had more authority or was more popular or had more standing and said, no, it isn't, then their truth became real in my life and in many times in actual circumstance. So I kind of recognized that and recognized more that my truth is my truth, and I'm entitled to have it as anyone else is entitled to have it, and that the whole thing of lending my authority towards truth to an external source has definitely changed, and that I'm more confident in being a gauge of my own truth in a way. Not to say I'm always right, certainly not saying that I don't also still listen to external things, but just that kind of notion that truth is always external and is always made by the person who has the most authority. That kind of crumbled away. Now, that's true also though, so that has true in the sense of what's true, what's real and all that, but in life, whoever has them, like if your boss at work has the most authority, what he deems to be true, to a large extent becomes true, because there's ramifications going up against that. But it's been aware of it, that my switch was that I also started to believe it. I couldn't believe my own truth if the external authorization of that truth was different from mine or opposing to mine. Not sure if I'm explaining that quite well, but yeah, that was one of the big ones. The other big one is noticing how prevalent the chosen one syndrome is in spiritual matters. Like, of course, we all knew that, but how easy it is to fall into it, how it's definitely a stage, a very early stage, I'd say one of the initial stages of along the spiritual path, where you're kind of told, or you get the idea, or you have some sort of feeling or some sort of thing within you that you're particularly chosen, that you're here to save the world, or you have a special message for the world, or that you're in some way going to change the world for good or for bad. And I've met a number of people who felt that they were going to change the world for good or bad in a large way, on the grand scale, and of course didn't. And it can be hard to, it can be hard to get over that, because we are chosen, we all are special, and I don't mean that in a way of saying we're all special and therefore no one's special. I mean it in the Crowleyan sense of every man and woman is a star, we all have our place, and every one of them is needed for the whole thing to work. Or as Alan Watts says, the universe doesn't exist without me, it doesn't exist as what it is without you. Every component, every part is essential and special. But yeah, I notice an awful lot in people, and I was quick to find it myself when I was presented with the notions of being chosen or special or whatever, and seeing it as a way of how, in my case, only speaking in my case, I'm sure there's a million reasons why people get to the chosen state, is because of trauma, and I had received, trauma, there's an event and then the trauma happens within, but circumstances and relationships and how I dealt with it, and how an answer, in a sense, is to feel that you're special in a special way, different from those other people who have hurt you, and it's a way of going that I will wait till they just find out who I am really deep down, or that's kind of, there's a revenge thing in it, or I don't know, any amount of different things that are in that, why you would want to feel the chosen one, and why would you believe it when it's presented to you. If you're on the spiritual path and you start meditation, or you're starting to do any kind of occult work, magic, whatever, watch out, because you will be told you are the chosen one at some point, or you will feel it. And try not to buy into it. Of course, occasionally some people will be the chosen one, I suppose, so there's always that. But I think they know. I think they know before they come here. Arthur Parvati. In my opinion, one of the dangers of case magic is solipsism, and it seems like there is a very fine line between, wow, I can project my will onto the world just by doing this, and, oh my god, I accidentally created COVID, or no one else actually exists. How do you avoid these pitfalls? I think there's two things going on there, Art, and one of them is solipsism. For those people who don't know, is that everything is a creation of my mind. And there's no external minds or influence. It's all a dream I'm personally having. There's no other mind out there. Whereas idealism is, it's all within consciousness. There is, everyone has an inner world, and there's an inner, that you're tapping into a greater conscious, but that there is this kind of, I suppose, dual nature or splitting off, where solipsism is strictly only in my mind exists. Problem with solipsism, it's impossible to disprove, of course, because your experience is that only your mind exists. Some people say the answer is yes, but you can talk to your parents about things that happened to you before you were born. But yes, you can talk to people in dreams about stuff that you weren't aware of too. So there's plenty kind of answers to solipsism, but ultimately it's unprovable, which is why it falls out of the kind of science thing, because you need to be able to disprove something for it to be scientific. The other thing is so that I accidentally created COVID, and that kind of, that's more magical thinking, I think, than necessarily solipsism, but I understand the overlap and what you're pointing at. And magical thinking is kind of that you are creating every experience. That it's, there was a kind of, Stuart Davis, if you ever heard about him, he talks about a guy who he was reading about after the attacks on 9/11, who kind of felt, he wasn't in New York, I'm not even sure he was in America, I assume he was, but who had felt that he had created them out of his own emotions and lack of shadow work, or by his own trauma, and that he had created these big events. Which in a sense I suppose has to be solipsistic, because it can only happen if you are feeling that you are the mind that's in control. And of course, the whole law of attraction and the secret thing would lend to the whole thing that you are creating the world. But it's co-creating, they would say, and also everyone else is creating it too. So there is that, it's not the law of attraction stuff and the mentalism stuff, and the new thought isn't being solipsistic necessarily, although some of it is. The way out of it, or the way to kind of avoid it, is to, number one, be humble. Don't think that you are the creating the entire thing. And be aware that your experience of the world and your creation of the world is the same as what everyone else's creation of the world is, and that you do have an impact in the world, but there's so many other things going on around the world and in your society and your family and your situation, your circumstances and all that also have a huge impact. And some of the bigger stuff you just have no say in whatsoever. Like, unless you actually physically were in Wuhan and were the person who A, ate the bat, or B, was the person who opened the lab door and let something leak out, whatever is the actual cause of that, or maybe it's C, something that we're unaware of, aliens or something, then you didn't actually cause it. But you see, it's probably more complicated than that, because there is obviously, things like public opinion and fashion and bigger kind of pendulums, I suppose, from a reality transurfing point of view, which vortexes or energies, or Egregors is another name for it, I suppose, that you're a part of on a bigger scale, so that the trauma of the 20th century is definitely playing out. There's no question of that. Capitalism, there's trauma from that, and that's definitely playing out. It's sending most of us insane and having mental issues. So like, there is all parts of different things. You're all part of bigger microcosms, macrocosms, and waves and ups and downs and groups and all this kind of thing. And just to, I suppose, be aware of that. That's what I'd be cognizant of am I magically thinking? Am I thinking I'm doing stuff that has a bigger effect than what I actually have? Or do I actually think that me doing something is in some way going to change the world? When it isn't, but like, there is, Charles Eisenstein always talks about as well, that your small actions, and going back to what I said about Alan Watts, that everyone is an intrinsic part of the universe. Charles Eisenstein said that even your kind of healing of your garden is part of the greater healing of the planet, and not to be discounted in any kind of a way. So it's probably comes down to, are you being egotistical about what you think you're doing, or are you being genuine? And you'll know for yourself. So I don't have the full answer, because I don't have that fully unpacked. And I have done a couple of videos around magic versus magical thinking, if you want to check them out as well. That's the best answer I have for you now. The Rabbit's Magician. What time are we? Okay. What are your thoughts on the relationship between chaos magic and folk magic? Could chaos magic just be the 21st century of folk magic? Strictly speaking, no, because folk magic is based on the spirit model, essentially, because it's talking to gods, the saints, the local spirits, the genius loci. It has a physicalness to it, like going to healing places, going to wishing trees are all part of it, and it's so a lot of that is more in that kind of traditional sense, whereas chaos magic it's essentially the belief of the magician. The belief itself is the agency of magic rather than an outside force. So yeah, it's the psychological model versus the spirit model, strictly speaking. But what I think that you could make an argument about is going that the folk magic was the people's magic versus the kind of the people in charge, or the aristocracy. It was a way that people could take control of themselves rather than having to go to the priest to ask for an intercession towards God. They could go and essentially do it themselves. And in that sense, I think chaos magic also lends people to be able to take a bit of control back in their life and not feel that control and power is all external to them. So it's similar in that way. So yeah, I don't think folk magic is going away, and there's definitely an overlap. The folk magic still has a reliance on externality, whereas chaos magic doesn't. Externality in that it's a spirit model. You're asking spirits, helpers, gods, forests, or whatever, and there's materia to it, like relics and all that kind of stuff. Whereas chaos magic can take or leave any of that. If it serves you, then it serves you. That's how I think. Spud. Around the world, there are plenty of places associated with magic. Where would you like to visit and why? I'd like to visit, any amount of places, but the first one that comes to mind when I think of that question is the pyramids in Egypt. I hear different reports though. Some people say it's very impressive, some people it's really disappointing. Kind of genuinely disappointing that they wish they hadn't have gone, because they would rather still have the kind of notion or the dream inside their head that these great pyramid things existed. So I don't know. I would like to go and find out, I suppose. Or go somewhere, kind of South American, take some ayahuasca, speak to the mother goddess or mother ayahuasca and hang out with in Aztec ruins or Mayan ruins or any of that kind of stuff. So there's that too. I'd love to go to India, but again, I think I have a kind of a too pristine notion of what India might be, where you go and it's all spiritual, and I'd say you just go and you see lots of really poor people and, you know, animals walking the street that are underfed, and I think it would destroy me. To be honest, I don't think I could recover from seeing that much sadness. So it's like buyer beware stuff going on there. You know, are you better off not knowing? Are you better knowing? Are you better to have your kind of inner world of what the pyramids are like? But you could go and that could be much greater than your experience. You could go to India and within the sadness find, you know, a more bliss than you've ever found before. I don't know. But offhand, that's where my brain goes when I think of that question. Abraxas. Any rituals or workings you want to do, but are also a bit scared, hesitant to do. I don't think I'm scared by anything, because I deliberately at one point said, what's the most scary thing I could do magically? And that was to evoke Lucifer. And this was back when I was still quite certain that Lucifer, you know, was one of the dodgy guys, which he may be too. It depends on what way you look at it. The left hand, right hand switch between Jesus and Lucifer I find it amusing a bit that they seem to just change their names for the same, what's the word? Deity, I suppose. Anyway, that's a conversation for another time. So I did that because that's the most scary thing. And right, he did come into my room, or at least it was a sensation of someone watching me in my room for about 3 weeks after it, at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, or in and around, which was quite creepy and, you know, disconcerting. But yeah, I didn't die, and nothing terribly bad happened to me. Now, so that was a challenge I set myself to, you know, do the most scariest thing I could at the time magically. And while it was creepy, didn't put me off magic, I suppose. I suppose I've hesitancy around goetic stuff or Solomonic magic, just because if I was going to do it, I want to do it right, and I'm not in a situation to do it right, and I don't have the actual space to do, you know, a proper circle and a triangle. And then there's all the different talks about the actual stuff you need. Like, do I actually need to kill a goat, skin a goat, make these, you know, different things? Being that at the time that would be something that a person would have done as a normal part of their existence, where it's a horrifying experience for me. And also it's, you know, the kind of people who I respect, who say that, you know, there's a kind of a seduction or an element to goetic work that is almost like an addiction, and that you can become addicted to it and it's not necessarily good for you and stuff. But yeah, so I have a hesitancy around it. But also, if I really wanted to do it, I would still do it. You know, it's just, if there was if I had a cause to do it, I'd do it tomorrow. Willow. Given Skinner's definition of psychological versus spiritual, this is Stephen Skinner's, and this is a reference to the glitch bottle interview that he did recently. How do you see yourself falling on that spectrum? I would have said for a long while that I'm definitely a psychological model magician, but I'm not anymore at all. That was kind of my get out clause, in the sense of not being open enough about what I actually think. And you know, if you're having an argument with someone who is a skeptic or an atheist or whatever, you can just go, well, it's just a psychological thing. It's a way to look at the world. Why not? You know, and it's kind of an excuse, or to not fully engage with it. You know, to not be fully owners, to not fully be present with it. For me, not talking about other people who have the psychological model, just strictly speaking about myself. So I was using it as a kind of an excuse, a thing to hide behind, whatever, where I secretly did believe the spirit model, but also was skeptical about it, that I didn't want to wholeheartedly, you know, announce to the world the spirit model, and then, you know, there's a part of me that's so skeptical and so incredulous that I didn't want to be made a fool of, you know. I didn't want to, personally, to myself or to the world, I didn't want to appear foolish. But of course, the beginning of the magic journey is the fool. So it starts with it being foolish, you know, and so that's the step. You have to step off the mountain, you step off the cliff or whatever scenery you find yourself in. And also kind of going by the Stephen Skinner interview, where he makes a very, very valid point that it's only from the 20th century onwards. And he points at Crowley for this, but I think it goes earlier. It's more the New Thought, you know, that kind of New Thought movement in America, that kind of switched the whole thing from the spirit model. Magic up until then was absolutely spirit model. And then you have the kind of Enlightenment, which affects people like Crowley and Christian Science and, you know, the New Thought thing, where they try to become more scientific, and then it becomes, you know, into psychology, which is Freud and Carl Jung, and so it becomes that kind of melds into a kind of, you know, a psychological approach that these, as Crowley said in his first introduction to the Goetia, these are just parts of the brain. He changed his mind about that later, but that kind of knock-on effect. So now, and that leads to chaos magic. You know, that's the trajectory, and to New Thought, or to law of attraction and the New Age. All of that. It's that kind of movement from the spirit model to the psychological model to mentalism. You also have like the Kabbalion and all of that in the middle of that. And being that it was the spirit model up until then, it seems likely that this is just a small trend in magic that will be replaced with the spirit model, or return to the spirit model again. A small blip, because of that's just where we are. As Gordon would say, this is what happens in this point in the timeline. Or this is just how we are, this just the current role we are playing. So yeah, I do see the benefit of the psychological model of magic, and it's very useful and can be, you know, it works. But yeah, actual magic is the spirit model for me. Do you see group egregores as the modernization of the daemon model? No. Some of them, yeah, but not overall, not the whole thing. I would say it's more like a reality transurfing idea of pendulums, which are vortexes of energy, or a particular form of the morphic resonance, that when something happens, it becomes easier for it to happen again, to a point it becomes a thing. So like your family is a particular pendulum, and you know yourself when you're around, your family, you behave in a certain way because there's a certain energy around it, there's certain rules and maneuvers and, you know, protocols that have to be observed, and if you break them, then, you know, there's tension and it's hard to get out of them. It's like when you meet someone from like an old job or from school, and you kind of get sucked into the person you were at the time, or the dynamic of that relationship as it was, even though you've may become a completely different person. So I think egregores are more something like that, like a pendulum, like a kind of a group think, which essentially is what egregore is, like, or a group rule, or a group brainwashing or something, in the same way that you have that in a family, or you have that as part of, say, a team or a band, or you know, anything where there's kind of the rules of the game, or the rules of the dynamics, or the interactions are unwritten in one sense, but everyone knows what they are, and there's a kind of an energetic feel around it. But it's created by humans. You know, it's created by interaction, it's created by trauma, it's created by, you know, people trying to protect, people trying to conserve, people trying to, you know, and it all just amalgamates and forms into this vortex of energy that it feels essentially like has its own kind of self-motivation, or its own sovereignty, or its own autonomy, but it's only because we allow it to have such a thing, that we have given it that. Because you can leave your family, you can leave the football team, you can, you know, get out of the photography club, whatever it is, that pendulum that has all these kind of set dynamics. So that's what egregores, pendulums, vortexes, complexes. Jung would call that a kind of, well, not necessarily, but let's say he did for the sake of it. So complex. So what you have, you know, what you like a kind of a role or a trauma or whatever becomes a complex in Jungian terms, and that we are complexes in superconscious terms. So that, you know, in divine we are a complex, we are kind of a pendulum within something, you know, greater than us. And so that it's not just humans, but it's how humans interact. And like say America has a certain pendulum. There seems to be at least two. Say, you know, you could have the Republicans and the Democrat have a very different energy, of a kind of a unwritten rules to a certain extent. So no, you know, not necessarily, but you can feel there's an energetic difference to them. So anyway, yeah, that's how I feel. Has Alan Watts influenced your practice? He has, of course. I think he's amazing, and I've a lot of time for Alan Watts. Not so, I find some of it a bit exasperating in his kind of hide and seek model of the world. It just seems pointless to me, and it seems unneededly cruel. And my experience of divinity doesn't have that. When I actually see it for the glimpses or the experiences I've had of divinity, it doesn't seem like it doesn't know what it's doing for a start, so it's not hiding, and it knows where I am, so it's not seeking. But yeah, in general, and I mean, what a wonderful voice, and you could just sit all day listening to him, and he's a great, anything I kind of know about, I suppose not anything, a lot of what I know about Buddhism and Hinduism and Eastern thought is all from just listening to hours and hours and hours of Alan Watts. Azela. How would you go about making a servitor last for a long amount of time without publishing about it? Give it attention. That's it. Use it all the time. Have it that, have it on your altar, have it somewhere where you see every day, whether it's a sigil, its name or whatever. And if you don't want it around all the time, have it as part of its programming that it can go dormant without dying, or it can hibernate, or only exists when you think about it. Or only exists if you call upon it, or whatever, so it can be that kind of stuff. But it's giving it attention, or whatever you've decided to feed it. I remember people saying things like this: you can feed servitors with the sweat of of exercise. But you have to. For me, I would say I would have to remember to do that each time. It wouldn't be an automatic thing to happen. Like, I would have to remember to do the offering, in the sense of that you could say every candle I ever light from now on is for God, or every meal I eat I give the blessing now, and it defeats the purpose of having the kind of saying will before you eat, or making the gesture, or at the time of lighting the candle or making the offering or whatever. So make offerings. Program it that it either can't die or it won't die, even if you don't give it attention, and give it plenty of attention. You don't have to in any way tell other people about your servitors. In fact, most people would say you shouldn't. I just did. Max, what do you do when your sorcery doesn't work? Personally, what I do when my sorcery doesn't work is a number of things. I see, first go, is the thing I'm looking to happen an actual thing that can happen? Is there too much involved for it to change? Like, if you're trying to, I suppose, impose your will on someone else, how likely is it that to happen? Given how they are as a person, given their kind of understanding of the world, or given the kind of preferences they have. Like say in love magic or something like that, where you're trying to demand someone be in love with you. Like, that's a big ask, and it's, it's morally not great either, but so I think a lot of that kind of magic doesn't work in some ways is because you're infringing possibly on other people. Now, that's not to say you can't use magic to infringe on other people, because clearly you can. But I have found that in my own kind of moralistic structure, that when I find that I am trying to do something that in some way, I suppose, infringes on someone else directly. I mean, all magic infringes on other people, but in a very direct way, that there's a part of me that doesn't like that and would probably, make sure it doesn't happen, or in some way holds back in that. Yeah, so is it possible to happen? Like, are you doing lottery level magic when, you don't have any money in the bank? Are you trying to win the jackpot when, you literally haven't had a paying job in 20 years or whatever? Attack the next big thing rather than the biggest thing. Or at least break it down into chunks. That seems to work for me. Some people have done magic and won the lottery, but Tony Robbins is a great story about that. But most people don't. The other thing I would do is shadow work, and look on the kind of, where is the parts in your life where you've sealed the valve, or you've turned the valve off. Where is there no flow? And it could be completely disconnected from the thing you're trying to do. You might be trying to work or do magic for a work-related thing, and you're having a bad relationship with your dad, and they don't seem connected at all. But when you solve the relationship with your dad, the work thing opens up. And it feels to me, at least in my experience, that any part of your life turns off the flow, or whatever is the correct word for that, the energy, the chi, the vril, any of these things, and that you have to kind of, you will know the one that's kind of, it's the thing you're avoiding, the thing you're trying to not do, the thing that you keep putting off, is usually the thing that is, slowing everything, halting everything down. At least if you're like me, that's how it feels. So I kind of, if something isn't working, I look around and go, what is the thing I'm avoiding here? And try and solve that. And invariably, solving that seems to then allow the flow back in, and so the energy starts moving again, and you get at least some movement on what you were trying to do in the first place. So yeah, are you trying to do something that's unlikely, or that is in some way infringing against your own moralistic beliefs, or other people, is it unlikely that other people will react in the way you want? Are you trying to do something too grandiose, like win a jackpot, when, you're not in a situation? Not to say that a millionaire is more likely to win, a lottery jackpot, but it's that the position that a millionaire doing money magic would be in someone who's heavily in debt doing money magic. The millionaire is not going to have, in theory, the desperation or the panic or the lust of result that someone who's in great need. Now, that's also emergency magic can work quite well because you really need it, and there's a huge drive and velocity behind it. Yeah, so you'll have to work that out, or not you necessarily, but we'll all have to work that out for ourselves. And then look at where you're blocking. Are you, in a very new agey sense, are you allowing? Where are you not allowing? Like, you can do all the magic you want for love, but if you feel unlovable and you feel disgusting and you feel self-loathing or whatever, it's highly unlikely that your love magic will work. And if it does, it'll be in some kind of negative way. It's something to reiterate the kind of feelings you already have around yourself. You'll find someone who will agree with you on how bad you feel about yourself, or something like that. Again, all of these things, not always, and there's kind of exceptions to all of these things, but that seems a more general thing about how it seems to work for me, or my view on it. And and also at the end, stop being a shitty person as much as you can, because that seems to affect it too. Work on your shittiness. Again, not you, Max, in general. Noodles art, dreams and dream magic, maybe lucid dreaming if you've had any experience. I actually talked a bit about lucid dreaming in, I'm pretty sure, the previous question and answers, where I talked about a dream where, a lucid dream where what I was doing at the time was I was working on lucid dreams, but was preparing as soon as I went lucid that I would have a plan what I wanted to do. And one of them was that I wanted to speak to John Constantine, talking about people recently on the podcast saying Crowley wrong. It's John Constantine, not Constantine. So I've been reliably informed. Alan Moore says that's like that. So I wanted to meet him, and I did. I also wanted to meet Ganesha, was another one that I had decided to meet, but there's an interesting story that the god of obstacles, of removing obstacles, couldn't get to me because there were so many people in the way. There were so many obstacles in the way, and he was kind of waving at me from the distance. So that was my only kind of, I've had many lucid dreams, but the plan was always to have a plan of what I was going to do when I went lucid, rather than trying to necessarily make the lucid dreams happen. And when I was doing that, I was having more lucid dreams. Now that I don't really have a plan, I couldn't tell you the last time I had a lucid dream. Now I have some weird dreams, but not that lucid where I can decide what I'm going to do. So there was another question, and it was about synchronicities, and the most interesting synchronicity that I've had. I also answered that in the last question and answer. So if you want to check that out, it'll be in the feed. So, good people of the internet, that's coming up to 40 minutes. That's that's going to be a long render for me, but this will be up as soon as possible, which, when you see this, it's up. So, good people of the internet, may you have a great day. May you have a great week, a great month, and may your best days be ahead. And as always, be well.